Osio Nigada. We just want to welcome everyone for coming today, and we're going to invite Bonnie Sikakuku to open with a prayer before we get going today.
Ta asquali itam na kwan talang na yef itam halay kyang na kwan katiyang ni wupa katiyang ni by obiyanta ni asquali.
Wado. We can go ahead and move the screen. Oh, no, go back, I guess. I'm sorry, I apologize. I just wanted to start today and really thank people for coming. We can go back to the first. I really want to thank people for being here today, and just wanted to share kind of frame about why we chose to do the work the way that we've done it. And it's really important to note that prior to colonization and ongoing federal policies that were really aimed at severing Native economies from our Native purposes, our communities engaged in trade. We had standing trade confederacies with other Native nations that included extensive trade routes and major trade centers throughout Turtle Island, also known as South and North America and Canada. Our nations established equitable economic systems and practices based on cooperation, sharing, hospitality, and responsibility for the common welfare of all. And this was demonstrated by the practice of the giveaway, where accumulated wealth was redistributed among its members to ensure community-wide survival and prosperity. And that's why we always say that Native people were the first cooperators. We were cooperating long before that Eurocentric model was established. And many of the folks in our cohort and the Native developers alike have received cooperative education in the Eurocentric traditional model that has been used in the US and in Canada. And having been a business developer for over 30 years with a focus on Native communities, I found that the traditional cooperative training did not address or even understand or comprehend sovereignty in our communities. So we stepped back and we intentionally chose a pathway to cooperative development that was people-centered, change process that was facilitated with a community of Native change makers to build capacity, and for the cohort to actualize their own dreams and enhance the quality of their work in the communities they serve and those of a wider community they're a part of. So we moved away from the traditional Eurocentric cooperative model and training and focused on the importance of relationships and capacity building to ensure that our cultural lifeways and values were woven into the very weft and warped of the cooperative the community is co-creating. Everything we did was grounded in our culture and the principles of abundance. And we believe that this is what is missing from traditional cooperative development training. So we started out in a very untraditional manner when you compare it to the Eurocentric model, but we had 10 sessions in our first, we had 10 trainings in the first cohort. And we focused on our journey together and contextualizing the work. And in that phase of it, we talked about what are our values and how are we going to treat one another. So we established a community of care practice. And these were things that we followed together as a group. And these were defined by the group and how they wanted to be treated and related to as a cohort. The other piece that we added to our training, and we've continued it through the other trainings as well, is facilitation. So we called it Building Trust and the Art of Facilitation. And we continued on building trust with cultural dynamics and us understanding how we want to work, those cultural dynamics that are live and living, are moving and working in our communities. We talked about money and values. And we wanted to explore our values around money. We also went into storytelling and building on abundance. That's where we started moving into the building on abundance and storytelling and appreciative listening. And then we went on to the organizing committee, and creating, what does this group look like? What kind of people do we want to attract to this work? Who are they? And then we went into building on abundance and we started individual mapping. And this was a really beautiful session. And we mapped the individual gifts of heart, head, hands, and spirit. Then we went into building on abundance and we went into asset mapping. So we started mapping the physical infrastructure, the natural resources, and community gifts that we have so that we can identify those in our community. Then we went on to more asset mapping where it was building on abundance, and we were mapping community associations and institutions. And then we kind of wound down at the end of our first session was on building on abundance and cooperatives, a model for doing business your way together. And with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists. And I'm really excited that they're here, and I feel so blessed to have worked with these women. And so I want to introduce Carrie Lynn Paul. And if we can scroll to that first and Carrie Lynn is an adult educator from Woodstock First Nation, and she has really been the woman behind really building out the building abundance in Indigenous communities and adapting the ABCD model. ABCD, yes. Okay, I just want to make sure I was get confused with those letters. And then we also have Trista Piwapis Conies, and she is from Canada. She's a cooperative developer for Cooperatives First. And she is the Indigenous Relations Lead and works with the Native communities in Canada, and just an amazingly talented woman. And then we also have Bonnie Sikakuku, and she was one of the cohort members, and she comes from the Hopi tribe, and she was just such a breath of fresh air and a delight to work with. And we also have Barry Webster. He's going to be a couple minutes late, and he is coming from Omaha Nation. And he works there. He's working on cooperative development in his nation right now. So we're really excited. And then we're going to go ahead and let Carrie Lynn start with the objectives for today. Next, the next one is the session objectives. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody. So glad that you're here, that you made the time to join us. I'm just going to go over objectives for today, and that's really, we're going to start with unpacking what the abundance-based or the asset-based community-driven development approach is, and we're going to define what Indigenous cooperative education is. We're going to talk about that spark that got this collaboration going, and then we're going to share a couple of examples of Indigenous cooperatives building on those assets in their work. Lastly, we'll talk about some of the impacts and benefits of using this approach, and we'll end with the lessons that we've all learned, or personal lessons, followed by question and answers. Thanks so much.
Next slide, please.
So this really came about because I was a student of the asset-based community-driven development. So we call it ABCD for short. I was a student of that for over 13 years. And I really saw that there was connections between what Indigenous communities did traditionally, how they built communities traditionally, and what this ABCD model that John McKnight and Jody Kretzman had developed and written up in the 90s. And so I tried to take the best of ABCD and bring it to what I called building on abundance in Indigenous communities, because I think we do have a lot of abundance. And how do we start from that perspective? Because we all know we also have a lot of issues and challenges in our communities too. but how do we start from a place that really is putting the spotlight on that abundance? And so that's really where this kind of created. And my colleague and I, and people at our institute, Brianne Peters, as well as others, really contributed to building this particular area of work. And, you know, I think what we took that was good from ABCD was really that rejection of the deficit model. So we're going to move away from being defined by our deficits and be driven or be driven by our fear of scarcity. I think the second part is really that community expertise. You know, all of our communities have enough and are enough. We have the experts, and how do we use them and put those people into action and give them opportunities? The next, I think, is the power of autonomy and self-determination. We are all striving for that, and I think the building on abundance is really an opportunity to bring that forward. The authenticity in relationship and trust. These are all components, I think, of what we call BAIC. It's just an acronym of BAIC. Flexibility and adaptability, I think, is baked into this process. And lastly, I think you know, it really helps validate our lived experience, because it gives people the opportunity to share what they know. You know, it's not about who has the highest credentials or who has the best education. It's really about what do you know and how are you serving your community, and how have you put yourself into serving your community. That's what's important, and that's what we want to highlight. So I think my question after all this is, how do we start cooperatives from this experience or this perspective? Thanks.
Next slide, please.
And so as part of building this model, we actually developed a set of principles. So we've taught Indigenous students at our institute for more than, I think, 12 years. We've had programs running, but we've been running for more than 60 years, and Indigenous people have been a part of that. So gathering their stories, we gathered about 40 of the stories from across all of those Indigenous graduates, and we looked at how they were building their communities. And so these were the ways in which we saw that they were building these communities. These are not comprehensive by any means. You know, I would strongly encourage any Indigenous person working in your community, you're probably going to have your own sense of what the principles are for your own community. But this I always like to say, we start with spirit. We as Indigenous people, I feel like our spirituality is a gift that we have to give to the world. And when we start in spirit, it changes the dynamic of how we start, whether it's a project, whether it's the opening prayer to this session. Really inviting that spirit into our work is so vital and important. That every person and community has gifts within. We know that. We know that everybody in our community. And I think traditionally leaders built our communities around those gifts, because if they didn't, how would we ever survive? You know, we needed everybody when we were gathering or hunting. Asking, listening, and sharing our stories is key. At the center, I think, of anybody's experience is that love of stories and that need to hear other stories. Because I think when we tell our stories, we are also saying to other people, I've experienced similar things. You are not alone. And so this is such a vital part of the BAIC process. It starts with what we have already. So our very first, one of our very first activities is always, how do you start with what you already have? So if you didn't have outside funding, if you didn't have outside partners, but you had the people in your community and you had what was existing already, what could you do with that? And I think that is an excellent place to start. And once you get a foundation there, then you can move on and say, how do we pick partners that are great and want to support our vision? You know, relationships and communication are at the center. And we know this. Anyone who's done work in Indigenous communities, everything gets done by relationship. And we have to prioritize that. And that's difficult sometimes when we come up against Western systems, because Western systems aren't always, or don't always value relationship. And so I think this is also special about the things that we do. Indigenous leaders involve others. And I think for us, I see so many talented young people, 2S LGBTQ people, elders, people with addictions. They have so much to offer our community, but we as leaders have to stand up and also ask for them to participate. And that takes a lot of strength and a lot of self-awareness to be able to say, come to the table. We need you in our community, because it's not the norm, I don't think. And lastly, having that shared vision and making decisions that honor our seventh generations, or our future generations. When we make decisions in any means, whether it's our cooperatives or not, having taking a step back and taking a moment to think about, well, how is it impacting the land? So I think, and then building those shared visions. A good leader is always going to build a vision, and they're going to find people to help build that vision with. And so those are the principles of abundance that we use in our program.
Next slide, please. And Trista's going to be taking this part.
Thanks, Pamela, and thanks, everybody. So as working within Cooperatives First, for those who may not know, like, our organization is a business development organization, help to support cooperative development in Western Canada in both rural and Indigenous communities. So coming into the role of, I'm now the Director of Indigenous Relations for Cooperatives First, working within Indigenous communities. And a lot of the teachings or kind of things that I've learned throughout developing co-ops is it's always been mentioned that Indigenous communities and co-op values are the same, and that the approach are very similar, and that Indigenous communities can just like really help on Indigenous co-ops. However, that's as an Indigenous woman, as somebody from like the Little Pine First Nation, I did not appreciate how it usually came from non-Indigenous communities saying, oh, the values are the same. Because as an Indigenous woman, I am not one to say whose values what, but just to kind of look at the aspect of everybody is different. Every community, an Indigenous community, an Indigenous group, whether or not it's tribe or region or First Nation, there are differences, but there are similarities. So it was really looking at the individual Indigenous community, and the tribe, and looking for those similarities without making a generalized statement or a pan-Indigenous approach to cooperative education. So I could go in and teach all I can about the fundamentals of co-ops, whether or not it's bylaws, incorporation, like business planning. But if the audience and the community do not embrace what I am teaching, or if it's just not resonating within, it's essentially useless. So it has to be that give and take, and seeing what the community does, and the abundance, and the people in the room, and what the gifts are bringing together. And in and working with many communities, you always saw the strengths in the communities. If you really take a look and spend time and listen to these stories of those abundance, the communities, people within many Indigenous communities still come together. They still support each other. Whether or not it's in celebration, which is like a powwow, or people come all around, or if it's in mourning, and there needs to be that support. So working together and helping people getting through these difficult situations or celebrations is one of the major strengths, and people working cooperatively within communities.
Next slide, please. So Trista's going to talk about, really what, when she realized when this approach, this building abundance in Indigenous communities, might fit well with the cooperative model and training and education. And we'll let Carrie Lynn talk too after Trista.
So yeah, going back to what cooperative education is, I think really within the spark and what got me headed at working on this path, working with Pamela, Carrie Lynn, and Bijiba. I did see you in the attendee. Conversations on saying how cooperative education and this training is always from that Eurocentric model. It does not come within, and it doesn't really show the gifts. It's people being talked at or expecting to be the experts and coming into a community and knowing everything. You don't know people's strengths, their stories, how they work together, the cultural dynamics. And having a place to share those ideas, and being able to, as facilitators, come in and be part of that circle. And our strength as co-op developers is to bring our gifts of knowing the cooperative model, but having the community really being that lead, because things are not done alone. Even traditionally, ceremonies are not done by one person. It is a community coming together to support each other. And Carrie Lynn, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just think it was really Trista, I think, that was the spark in all of this. She came into a course that I was teaching in, or I actually guest facilitated in an Indigenous women's leadership course through our institute. And then she came in then through my program, the BAKE program. And I think just being exposed to the framework in terms of how we start things, I think that really lit a spark in her to say, I see a connection here. And then she introduced me to Pamela, and then we just went on fire. And I include Bijiba in that. We really, I think, worked well as a team, and we tried to see how we could bring this program, the Native Cooperatives program, together with the Building on Abundance approach. And yeah, that would be all I had to add. Thanks.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Trista, you get to be on again and share some examples. We're just putting you in the hot seat, my girl. And just share examples of different types of cooperatives and how they work in the communities, and even the ones that are informal, because that's something we see a lot in our communities. We're already working collectively a lot of times. We're doing things together, and we may not be like a incorporated or an LLC, but we're in informal. And I know that you had a really good story about people working together and that was so beautiful. So I hope that you can talk about the community that came together during COVID and how that just kind of grew into something else altogether. And other examples, I know that you had shared about the language cooperative. You also shared about the co-op where it's a group of consultants and educators. So go for it. Thank you.
Okay, so as I was saying, like many communities are still working together, collectively and informally, but coming to work together for a purpose. This story that Pamela talked about is actually from a neighboring community of mine. And it was early days, 2020, there was a lockdown of COVID, and people were not allowed to leave the reserve, the First Nation, and they were stuck at home. So there's actually a group of women within the community who saw that the impacts of the lockdown, especially on the elders that live alone, and they really rely on going into town to their local restaurants and getting their food, and because they don't cook for themselves. And so these women didn't want like the elders to have to suffer during this lockdown. So what they did was they actually pooled all of their the food they had, and they came together and they cooked and they prepared all the meals once a day to ensure that all the elders on the nation were fed. So they would drop off these meals once a day just to ensure that like the elders were not going hungry. They did this on their own for the first while with no support, and then once leadership got involved and were able to support them afterwards. But for the first few weeks they were doing this on their own time with what they had in their fridge, to ensure that like the elders were constantly being fed. And then one of the women within that group was the cook at the school, and she said, well, actually some of the kids as well, like their only meal was the hot lunch program, so we have to include the kids too. So they just kept making sure that they came together to feed everybody. This collective of women wanted to make sure that people were fed and to get through this hardship. So after the restrictions were lifted and everything was slowly getting back to normal and events were happening, they actually continued to work together and opened up a food truck and went to different POWs and events and were able to like capitalize on this business because they all had like those gifts and those being a cook with the safe food handling. They like were cooking together. They understood how each other works, and it went well. So yeah, then they continued having a food truck.
Yeah.
And then so taking a look at examples of these, and this is like one example like that hit close to home, but you hear of these stories happening all over Turtle Island throughout the whole pandemic, where the community's coming together with like the hunting parties and the fishermen that would go out to catch enough to make sure that people were fed. And then so going from then these inspiring stories of how people work together and how those even informal opportunities are there, and when people take some of those informal opportunities and capitalize on them. I was very fortunate to work with a group of elders who had these informal discussions, and they realized they needed to do something, and they needed to do something now. So they came to us, and they had already structured themselves, and they needed to create an entity to preserve the language, preserve their cultural way of life, including land-based learnings. They needed to continue on this work, this important work. And how things had been occurring, and which unfortunately happens in a lot of communities, is we need an elder. Who knows an elder? I know one. So then they just felt like they were elders for rent, and they're like, no, we have so much more to offer, and we need to help the youth within our community and to grow our cultural teachings. We don't need to be answering to any higher organizations or be considered consultants for outside organizations. We are going to do this on our own. They discussed it. They knew what they were going to do. They approached Cooperatives First to support, just to get them through the paperwork and the process, because they already had their structure. They knew what their strengths were. They had like retired social workers, teachers, people who did the land-based education, people who taught their language, to come together to bring in these cultural camps for their community. And with this incorporation, they were actually able to access grants like throughout Canada and locally to continue in part of like reconciliation and bringing back the culture to the communities.
I can jump in, Trista, if you want. I can share the White Corn Cooperative.
Sure.
Okay. I think one of those for me that was a very inspiring story was the White Corn Cooperative. They are out of Oneida. They never incorporated under state law. They actually incorporated as an LLC under Oneida law. And what I think I really love about the story is that money never exchanged hands. They figured out a way, and I think I remember one of the women talking about this. It took a long time. They consulted with the community from the very beginning. And so that building trust part, that piece at the front, really took a long time. But I think that for me, it's about me noticing how they're already taking an asset-based approach or an abundance-based approach. It wasn't about me teaching them. It was about me recognizing and holding their story up, I think. So they've calculated how many hours it takes to actually grow the corn from beginning to grinding it, which is 56 hours. And so people invest their time, and then they're paid in corn. And I think this is really great that, and any extra that's left over, they give to the elders in the community. And I think it's such a beautiful story because it's a unique model of cooperatives, but I feel like it's Indigenous people doing Indigenous cooperative work in the way that they know how to do it and want to do it. And to me, that's the right way. It might not be the right way legally or whatever, but it's the right way. And so it took them a while to figure it out, but I think it's definitely a story that I remember. It sticks in my brain. I'm very inspired by it. So I wanted to make sure that we shared that. Trista, did you want to share one more?
Yeah, I will share another story. And this one is another one of our clients who actually were a team of consultants who did curriculum development. And they already knew their value system, their mission, and it was to provide services, so governance support and education, but doing it from a community point of view. So they were a team of consultants who are Indigenous, who work in Indigenous communities to really respond to the way is a community level approach, which I think is extremely important. But as individual contractors, if you're an entrepreneur on your own, it's extremely hard. Plus, you don't get some of the benefits that other organizations get. So by being able to pool their ideas, their resources, they wanted to also give back in a bigger impact, a more meaningful way than individually, but collectively they could give more back to the communities in which they work, and as well as being able to benefit individually as members to be able to obtain group benefits and economies of scale and getting their branding and their name out there. So being able to take that collective approach, but putting it in towards like a westernized construct, like it really does bring both like the traditional way of doing things and things that are done the Canadian way, for lack of a better term. So.
I also wanted to say, I hope I was very inspired by Bonnie, and I know Bonnie, I hope you actually tell your story. But I love that your cooperative was doing your cooperative in the way that best met the needs of your community and the people involved. And I know sometimes we think because it's not incorporated in a certain or particular way that it's not valid, but to me, I always want to uplift stories of Indigenous people starting cooperatives in whatever way makes sense to them. And so I hope you can share. Thanks.
I'll share one story. It's Koala Arts and Crafts. They're the oldest Native cooperative in the United States. They're over 70 years old. And when they started, it was the basket weavers. And the reason why they started was the tribe was so poor at that time. They're very prosperous now, but they did it for burial funds. So they were putting money away so they could take care of burying their family and taking care of funerals and things like that, that they, the feasts, all the things that go along with taking care of a loved one. And what I really appreciated when I was interviewing them, and we've worked with them a lot, we partner with them a lot because they have such a beautiful story. They now have a 10,000 square foot building. But they've been around for a long time. But one of the things that I really like is they've created an opportunity that they're perpetuating their traditional Cherokee art. And they have people there now that people will send baskets back to be repaired. They have people that can repair baskets. They have people there that can appraise work, and they can also tell them if it's authentic or not authentic. They do classroom instruction in the community, but something that they do that I love about our Native cooperatives is that, even like the White Corn Cooperative, they're very environmentally sound. They're responsive to the ways that everything is changing. And, and how our climates are changing and how we have to react and respond to that. And one of the things that Koala Arts and Crafts did was they did a partnership with a watershed. And so they're protecting the waterways. And they've also created a way for Native gatherers to be able to gather river cane, bulrush, different things that they need. The other thing that they did was they replanted trees over the entire tribe's jurisdiction. So they brought back all these trees. They grow the natural dyes and then they can them and they deliver them to the elders that are basket weavers. They also, now they have a complete arts program in their high school. So every child that goes to school there learns how they are fluent in all of the traditional arts of our people. And some of the kids, one year, they created a new way to fire pots that are like 5 feet tall. And so wood-fired pots. And so they've created a pathway for their community and for their artists to have a presence nationally, internationally. They take care of them, but they're also preserving the traditional plants, the trees, and taking care of the waterways. And so these cooperatives play a huge part in our communities, in our community well-being. So I'm just really proud of all of the people that we've come into contact with and the stories that we've heard. And again, it's the stories that make everything, that really just are so beautiful. We'll go to the next slide, please. And we're going to let Bonnie talk because she was one of the people in the first cohort, and we worked together for several months, and because of the funding from the Native American Agricultural Fund and the partnership with Cooperative Development Foundation, none of this would have been possible without their support, and even support that came in from the USDA. And we were able to bring all of the cohort together in St. Paul and be together for 3 days. And it was really beautiful. So we'll let Bonnie talk about the impacts and benefits for her being a part of this cohort and her work, what she's doing in her community.
Good morning. My name is Bonnie Sikakaku, and I'm Hopi, and I live in northern Arizona, way up in the high plateau and on the mesas. Our villages are on top of mesas, and we live in a dry, arid area. And the impact that I was a member of the cohort, and my story to share with you all is that due to family dynamics as I was growing up, I never left the reservation. I've always lived and been here all my life. I have 5 sisters. Half of them were able to leave and get a college education. And that always bothered me that I never was able to fulfill, that expectation of my family, and felt like, oh, I'm not worth much, And somehow this came across my desk, and I signed up for it because I'm learning to find the courage to still learn other ways of what's out there. And so I signed up, and I'm really glad I signed up because I, first of all, found the courage to find this group, and they helped me. The impact was that they really helped me to be okay with who I am and where I'm at and what I know. I was fortunate to be grown up with elders that still were very, very, very immersed in our way of life, our philosophy, our values, and our language. And that is what I have to offer. And I always felt like I never fit into a place here, or even with things outside of where I live. But I knew I had that to offer. And so the group here has really helped me to feel like I am worth something, and I do have value to add to what we want to teach our youth, or whatever co-op or group we're working with. And so I really felt valued, as I mentioned, and that it was meaningful what I had to offer. One of the things that I learned from the project or the curriculum was the community asset mapping, because we as Indigenous peoples are visionary. We only we learn by seeing. So being able to put that picture and create that picture of the community assets that we have was really meaningful to me, because you can read it. People can list all these things, but if you don't put it in somewhat of a picture format, sometimes it's hard to understand what that means. So when we did that exercise, I was able to see through a picture all the assets that we had. The other thing that I learned was even in our way of life is that leadership, no matter what capacity you have as a leader, you always include everyone.
Mm.
And building that relationship with everyone became more important as I could see it as we were navigating through each model. And everyone has something to offer, and everyone has something to give. And that really was brought out in this program that we were a part of. And sometimes I see that, even at home, there's a challenge where, oh, we'll only select certain people because maybe they're the experts, even when it comes to our Hopi way of life or value or our language, but when you put it in a picture format, you're going to see that there's more than that same group all the time. And so that helped me to visualize the assets that we had in different capacities. Pamela mentioned there's natural resources, there's the schools, there's the institutions that are all available to us. And we can't see it because it's hard for us to pick up a paper and read it and say, oh, okay, I have this resource that I can go to. But if we see it in a different format, it helps us. How we learn here at Hopi is we're totally immersed in, in the language, how to do it, why we do it, and so forth. So this program helped to balance that. And what I work with youth, and we really try to remind them also that sometimes too much is not good either. So trying to find that balance of that threshold of that middle ground can be challenging for us as Indigenous people, and we make sure our youth understand that it's okay, and sometimes too much is not good and too little is not good either. So where do we find that middle ground so that we can continue to be productive, we can continue to live a good life, we can continue to give back to our people? So that's a nutshell of what the other thing that I thought was really helpful was for, learning to facilitate, because in Indigenous communities, and we tend to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk until we come to a consensus, which is a good thing. But there are a few things, and that's where you find that middle ground of maybe you need an answer by a certain time. So learning to facilitate a conversation that is meaningful, but yet you're going to get an outcome, but you're not going to also just cut people off either. So that was really a great section also that we were introduced to. And so my father would always tell us, there's our Hopi way of life, our Hopi values, our language that but there's also all these other worlds out there that like school, college, so these different programs that you can get a certificate on and stuff. You still continue to learn, and you take what they have to offer, and you incorporate it into what here, and help. It's gonna just help you to be a better person. And so we've learned to do that, and so all in all, I'm very grateful that I found the courage to sign up and be with these amazing people that are doing amazing things, and being able to share and continue to work with our youth, because I think the most irresponsible thing that I could do is not share and not help our youth find all these resources to help them be a better person, live better, and give back to their communities, and of course continue to live our way of life and continue to speak our language. Asquali, thank you.
Wonderful. Did Barry Webster make it to the webinar? He must have not. I'd like to invite Carrie Lynn and Trista to add anything. And Bonnie, thank you so much. You've been just a delight. We just all, really, really always appreciated your insights, your wisdom, your lived experience. And you always had good words for all of us. So we just want to thank you so much. I'd like to invite Carrie Lynn and Trista to share anything that they would like to about impacts and benefits of this being together like this.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I want to appreciate Bonnie first. I learned a tremendous amount from you. I think you're very strong, and for you to take the chance to even join the group was tremendous. And I really love and want to enforce that lesson of once we learn something, we have to pass it on. And certainly, I know that I'm not a perfect facilitator of any of this, but I think that's what drives me is like, how do we share what we know? And this approach is not a strictly Indigenous approach to how to build community, but that's okay. This is where we're at. I take the what Albert Marshall calls two-eyed seeing approach, and it's taking the best of both worlds, the best of the Western world and the best of the Indigenous world, and bringing those two things together. And I think that's what the building on abundance and Indigenous community really does. And I hope it does it well. I think for me personally, how this has impacted me, besides being very inspired by the people, the participants, and the other facilitators I got to work with, I've really seen us be able to be kind of like a community of practice. So as facilitators, we've really gotten to spend some time together and talk about how do we keep this mindset of building on abundance, and how do we keep each other accountable sometimes, right? Because even though we facilitate this, doesn't mean that we can't slip into deficit thinking or having a deficit mindset. I think it's also so important that we're sharing and uplifting other people's work. Bonnie's work and the Oneida Corn Cooperatives work, or Pamela's work, or Trista's work. I think just giving opportunities to and space for people to tell their own story, not necessarily tell the story for them. Yeah, and I think we've done a good job in terms of giving each other opportunities. So beyond this, Pamela has been able to take a course at our institute, an ABCD course, and meet other Indigenous graduates. And I think she's really brought things to our thinking around this that weren't there previously. She also brought some very beautiful templates, which I hope we have the opportunity to share somehow, some way. Yeah, and I think again, like just that gentle reminding of each other of how to stay in abundance, because we don't ever want to say, let's ignore those issues and challenges and problems, because that's not realistic. But let's not start there. Let's start with what is good and what we have. And I think that approach is a very decolonizing approach, and it'll help us and build us in ways that are good, I think. So thank you.
Thanks, Carrie Lynn. I didn't want to follow Bonnie because Bonnie's unbelievably inspiring, and I was so happy and so thankful that I was able to meet such an amazing group of people throughout the entire course. Coming back into the creation of this program and this first cohort, I really wanted to bring in the impact of changing people's mindset and thinking that they have the abilities, the skills, the gifts to make the change within their own communities. That seems, and I still really think that overall that's I would love to see, but the impact on how the course developed and throughout the entire process has really impacted myself. So and it's all the way that I approach the work within communities and how I'm going to be working with new groups and hearing from and being so grateful that I was able to hear some of these stories of people throughout just starting their co-op journey to establish co-ops. Like we had groups from all different ranges that were learning off of each other, that everybody who came in and participated had such amazing insights and solutions that just was able to build the curriculum as we went along and just to make it way more impactful. So creating that space for people to do that sharing, and to think of when you're creating a co-op and you're thinking about, okay, so how are things going to be distributed, or how to ensure that members continue to be engaged. That's one of the issues that always happens in all co-ops, is member engagement. But hearing stories of people on how they keep people together, that community link, that it's not in it for myself, it's not an I thing, it's a we thing. Let's all of us rise together and like carry the work and share that workload, and the different approaches, how everybody and all the participants were able to share, and be so willing to give this knowledge, and knowing that, and trust within the group to know that they're able to share, and nobody's going to judge them for the way their communities do it. It's just a different approach. I see Barry's on.
Oh, well, we better let him share about the impact and benefits of this training. How do you see him? I can't see him. There he is. Hi, Barry.
Hey, hello, hello. Hang on. Yeah, I can see you guys. I can't. I don't know where my face is, but I guess if you can see me, that's good.
We can see you, Barry.
Yep.
Hey, hello. How's everybody?
Good,
We're
good.
all
Nice to see
good.
your face.
Yep. Good to see you. I'm glad you were able to make it. So if you could share with us the things that, what you're walking away with from this training and how you're using it in your community.
Okay. First of all, I think it's still morning here, so good morning to you guys. I don't know if I should share this, but I'll share it anyway. I don't know if it's what you're looking. Can you hear me?
Oh, you're having problems with your technology.
Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Oh, all right. So you can hear me now, right?
Yes, we can hear you, Barry.
Oh, wow. Hello?
We can hear you, Barry. He's having problems with the technology.
Hello?
Hello? Can you hear us? What's a webinar without
Hello?
technology problems? It just seems to be natural, especially when we're calling in from rural communities where we don't have good broadband or connectivity. Oh,
Now we wanted to hear what he had to say.
I know, geez, that guy. Well, that's too, I know one of the things, Barry's been practicing the things that he learned about facilitation. And he had me, I drove down there. I got up at 3:30 in the morning, so I was there at 10:30 for the high school. They have a beautiful, his community is so beautiful. And just to see the work that's happening there. And the students want to start a cooperative. So I drove down there, we shared about what we had learned. And, you know, for me, this has been, it's a learning that keeps growing inside of me. And I keep seeing ways that I can broaden what I've learned to bring to the communities that we work with. And I have a different lens now, and I'm really thankful for that. And I've really felt like, having the ability, you know, I look at everything around us that the Creator has made, and the Creator has put us in an abundant system. And we've been conditioned to look at everything as a deficit and look at scarcity instead of, and that creates competition. So when we come together from that abundance framework, then we know there's enough for everyone, that we can all come together. And there's something that I'd like to ask Trista to talk about. It was, to me, I'll always carry this. There's just so many things that I learned from all the participants and from the facilitators that, you know, I hold so close. But one of the stories that when we were talking about the gifts of hand, heart, spirit, and mind, was what you taught us about the bundle. Trista, would you mind talking about that? Because it was so beautiful.
Yeah, so I believe everybody has a like a medicine bundle, or like a bundle for themselves with like the tools that they use, including their gifts, their experiences, education, that they just build and share, and that is theirs, and they use with it however you they want. And everybody has one, and it's just bringing those new teachings, new learnings, and everything together. The way I was thinking of, you know, what this course and this whole experience has kind of brought to me was thinking back of hearing people talk about education is the new buffalo. Like I hear that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's said so many times that to me it's starting to sound cliche. But what does that really mean? You think back to the, you know, times before colonization, and coming from the prairies, like the prairies of Canada, and where we did have like the buffalo and the bison. And that's what we lived off of. That's what we survived off of. It was our food, our tools, our shelter, our clothes. That's what we needed to survive. And although education is the new buffalo, if you look back into those times before, and people did not go hunting for themselves. It was just to stay in the community. It was just like to help your family, to get those tools, to get the food, to nourish people, to survive. It was a survival thing. So if you're going to think of education as a new buffalo, it's not meant for somebody to show off or to brag about. Look at all the papers on my wall. Look at, you know, I went to this institution and, you know, I have this many letters behind your name. It's how are you going to use it, and how are you going to share this with people within your community? You are going to take what you're learning and bring it back to your community, and it's sharing. And that's how our people are going to survive and grow and thrive. It's done collectively because you're doing this sharing, and everybody has these bundles to share with, this knowledge to share. And we were really fortunate because the ones that came in to the course were able to share theirs with us. So then the rest of us and the people within the group were able to grow.
Thank you. Is there any other comments that you would like to make before we move on to the question and answer?
There was a suggestion in the chat that maybe Barry turns his video off so we could at least hear his audio without interference.
Did he get
Is that
back on?
possible? He's still on, yeah.
Barry, can you just not have your camera on and you can share the things, the impact and benefits for you? We want to hear from you. Okay, you need to unmute.
He's frozen again.
Okay, he's got these some technical.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, turn your camera off and just unmute so we can hear you. Yeah, he keeps freezing. We're so sorry that you're having tech issues.
Yeah, well, I can wrap us up if we want to go into question and answer.
Yes, please.
Okay. So I just wanted to summarize this by saying that this has really been our collective experience in trying to combine an asset-based or abundance-based approach with Indigenous cooperative education or training. You know, I think we strive to stay community-driven, adaptable, flexible, rooted in our shared Indigenous values and experiences. Like someone said earlier, you know, we're not all the same. There's so many different nations and ways of doing things, but I think there are underlying shared values that we try to build on, and shared experiences for sure. You know, and I think we're just excited to see where does this journey take us, and you know, how can you all be a part of that moving forward? Yeah, and so I think that would be how I'd sum this up so far. So we can go into question and answer if you want, Kamala. I know there's a question in the chat. A couple of people, so some people wanted to know how they could get involved, and then somebody wanted to hear more about the Pottery and Dyes program.
That is at Koala Arts and Crafts, and they're in Cherokee, North Carolina. And there's several of the artists have written books on dyes. And at home, where I'm from Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, we were actually collecting dyes and canning them. So that's one of the things that we were doing. You know, that's blood. It's a lot of different plants that are used, like bloodroot is one of them. It goes into the baskets, into the double wall weave baskets. So, but you can reach out to Koala Arts and Crafts, and Mary put their link in the chat box. And if we could move the slide to the next slide, and then if people have questions, please feel free. I know there was some people that asked about how they can get involved. We are we're looking at planning the sessions 3, 4, and 5. And our goal is we want to be able to have a certificate program for Native cooperative developers. So that's something we are working on. And you can email me, I'll put it in the chat, and connect with me so that when we move forward, we'll be going into more in depth. We'll continue to work on facilitation. We see that as a critical component in working in our communities and having that skill set to be able to facilitate a meeting. And, but we will be going into putting together, you know, your business canvas. But we're putting it together differently because we're putting it together based on the assets that we have in our communities when we're putting those business plans together, that it's all inclusive of all of those things that we discussed at the very beginning in the coursework. And then we'll be going into, you know, incorporating the bylaws, keeping people engaged, to the ongoing education for your community to keep community engaged, and then going into, you know, structuring the co-op and getting it launched and deciding how you want to set it up. So that's our plans, and we'll if you want to communicate with me, I can keep you updated as we move forward with completing this training for working in our communities. But we welcome your questions, so please don't be shy. Mhm. Did you want to say something, Trista or Carrie Lynn?
I want to ask you a question.
Uh-oh.
I do actually want to say too, since doing this program, we have actually created some micro credentials for the Building on Abundance course. So anybody who's taken it actually can come to St. FX University and get those accreditations. I'll give you the steps to support students in doing that if they're participants in doing that if they want. But I wanted to ask you if you could share some key challenges you faced while integrating Indigenous values into mainstream cooperative education.
When you know, I just would like to give a credit to someone, and it's Kevin Egberg. He's with Cooperative Development Services, and he actually, it was through a grant that we got together, and and another person that I really want to acknowledge, he's passed on, and I miss him so much. His name was Chaz Wheelock, and he was from Oneida, and I always considered him an Indigenous scholar. And he's the one that really challenged me when we were working together several years ago about cooperatives. And so he inspired me. But when I did the first kind of the co-op book for tribal communities, it was really based on that Eurocentric model. And the second time around, what was really important was getting the stories from the community and hearing, kind of putting together some, I don't want to call them case studies, but, you know, having, being able to share these stories and just see how much further, I call it indigenuity, where our communities take that creative spirit, those gifts that we have of creativity and vision, and how they, just the things that I've seen from the stories that I've heard around the country, I'm just always in awe of what they do. So when I first started this, I used some modeling from up in Canada, and Trista was the one that really brought my attention to it. And it was a big learning for me because I did kind of a pan-Indian values approach. And Trista was the one that really talked to me about that and really, you know, shared with me that that model that was being used up in Canada that we'd gotten permission to use as an overlay when we did the Indigenous guide, really was really beautiful in the way that we changed what we were doing and how we were looking at it. And, you know, like I said, I'm a learner. I'm constantly learning from this group and from other people that I interact with. But now what I see about incorporating, I don't see a challenge. It's just working with the community for the community to weave their cultural values, what they want to weave into the building of their cooperative. It's their choice. It's not mine, it's theirs. But I really try to encourage it because there's so much beauty. There's just so much beauty in us being able to integrate our culture into what we're doing and not leaving it outside, that it's a part of who we are. It's what we breathe and how we live. So from that standpoint, I feel like I feel really good. And then I worked with a first speaker from Sioux Valley. And he really helped. We worked together for several months, kind of looking at that cooperative model and how does it look from an Indigenous framework. And that was really the beginning. And then when Trista introduced me to you, Carrie Lynn, and to that training, it just, everything fit. It was just like an aha moment that we can do this our way. We don't have to use, we know what's good for our communities. And it's about exercising self-determination, but it's also knowing the things that we've been given, they're good. And they worked for us for thousands of years. And I see communities taking that back. And I'm really excited by that. And I'm really excited by how people are using their own cultural values in their community to develop their co-op model and what's driving it. And it's usually, it's something in their culture, their teachings, like what Trista shared about the language co-op. It just never, I'm just always in awe when I hear people's stories about what brought them together and what's driving what they're doing. So thank you.
Can I add something about just kind of challenges of this co-op education course is there's no manual, and I don't ever foresee having an actual manual and a course, online course, and this is how you're going to create an Indigenous cooperative, because it really does bring in the experience and the knowledge and the familiarity. I know we've talked a lot about the abundance mindset, but you also can't forget the community challenges that people have to go through, whether or not it's like bureaucracy or legislation, lateral violence, leadership. You know, there are specific challenges to each community, and we're not glossing over those challenges. We are using the other people within the cohort to provide advice or their stories or their experience on how they overcame it. So it really just opens up a different way of thinking and a different mindset to addressing both the abundance and, you know, overcoming those challenges.
Thank you, Trista. Someone had a question. There's a couple of questions here. There was a woman from a community foundation that wanted to know about investment. And those are things we are talking about because we kind of bake that in into some of the kind of when we're working with communities, one of the things that's really needed is seed money to get started. That's something that we really need to get off. Now in Canada, they're different than we are in the US. Canada has nonprofit cooperatives that can receive grant money. We don't have that in the US. We have nonprofits that have formed cooperatives, but not as a nonprofit receiving grant money. But in the beginning, we're trying to inspire even our tribal communities, you know, like our tribal leadership, to look at how can we fund? How can we be a fiscal agent for a co-op that's getting off the ground? What's the role that we can play? And so there is things that are needed in our communities. I'm really glad that you asked that question because we have been talking with foundations about that we need that seed money and the flexibility to have that seed money. And then again, then we need fiscal agents to receive that money for the co-op as they're getting off the ground. There was another one about, I think this would be more of a question for Carrie Lynn. It was about kind of ongoing, do you have plans to continue?
Yeah, I will say part of our philosophy of work is really being invited in to do the work. We don't approach people to say, here, you need to learn this. We build relationship and say, you know, and wait for those communities or organizations to approach us to be invited in. I think that's a really important piece to our work. It's a lesson learned on my part in my lifetime that this works. This is the best way to move forward. I will say that Alex Stone, who was with us in our in-person gathering, did invite me to come and do a presentation to the Cooperative Works, their education program that they have. So I don't think there was any Indigenous people in it, but she made the space for me to be able to talk about this asset-based approach. So we're definitely open to any of that. I hope that answers the question.
Also, to answer a comment that Sally made, is I see this as really important for training for other communities of color and how they want to handle it. I think a lot of times there's values in these communities. I think in dominant society, it's kind of a melting pot and kind of expect everybody else to be part of, you know, kind of put you in a bucket and take a swizzle stick and swizzle you around, and we're kind of all the same color. And so I think it's really important for communities to own their own cultural values and practices. I mean, we support that, and we support that in our own communities, but we also see that this is a tool that would really work in other communities of color and give them more that I think what Carrie Lynn was talking about, that autonomy, that self-determination for them to design a co-op based on what their practices are, what their cultures are. So we see this as a model that's very adaptable. And I did take the training at Coady Institute, and I really learned a lot. And I hope that someday we want to bring Carrie Lynn's course for the Native Women's Leadership here to the US. And I just see it as a really invaluable tool for us to, you know, like Trista was saying, we do have challenges. I'm like a half glass full person all the time. And that's just how I look at the world. And I get in trouble because sometimes I don't look at the other side of it. But what I really see is when a community, what's really inspired me is when a community has that aha moment. When all of a sudden they see they have assets where they didn't look at them that way before. But it is a challenge because we have become conditioned to kind of, I call it like the philanthropic Hunger Games. You know, we just kind of come in and in order to get funding, you have to present yourself as the most pitiful group of people on the face of the earth instead of looking at what are the strengths, because we're still here. We're still here after everything that has happened. We still practice our cultural life ways. We help each other. We're engaged in our communities. And so those are the things that really inspire me. And you know, with this. And I really want to thank people for their comments. And, you know, if there's anything, you know, if you want to have Carrie Lynn and Trista do a presentation, we can put their contact information in the chat and you can communicate with them. If you're calling from Canada, you can communicate with them. So you want to thank
There's one comment that was said just a few minutes ago that just kind of caught my eye, and it was about yeah, people don't always get along or trust each other. And facilitating. I think we had an amazing facilitator, guest person to come in, and we discussed like kind of what you think of traditional co-op teachings or board training, and they always talk about like the Robert's Rules of Order, and it's always okay, we need to like come to an agreement, but there always seems to be like a winner and loser. But being able to really think of different approaches to bring others' mindsets and to come up with a consensus. Because when you actually like open your mind to other ways of agreeing or a hot button issue, it expands the possibilities that there's not just one versus another way of doing things, that there's so many more options that are available. So it was Sarah Silva who led that presentation on facilitation, and she did an amazing job, and really opened up my eyes into the facilitation skills on getting a consensus based approach, but not sitting there and arguing about it for hours and hours, but tools that we could learn within our own communities. Because as co-ops, and all co-ops, you do want all members to have that vote, like the one member, one vote. Everybody has that voice, and that's so important and crucial in co-ops and in our communities.
Thank you, Trista. We used actually Sarah Silva, I think both Carrie Lynn and I went on to take additional facilitator training because it was so good. The organization is called aorta.coop, I believe is what it is, like aorta, your heart. And it was really phenomenal. And it was just heart-centered, but really some great tools on how to handle conflict. That really, I just can't say enough good things. And we were really fortunate. Our friend Bijiba was the one that introduced us to Sarah Silver, and she has been a gift, and we will continue to use her. She knows our group. And if there's any people, if you are interested in participating in this training with us, just email me, please. And we will do that. And then Mary asked about a list of Indigenous co-ops. I do have one. If people are interested, I can share that list for the US. You would have to speak with Trista about Canada. But I do have a list, and it keeps growing, which is exciting. And
Okay, we have two websites. I'll put them in the chat. It's cooperativesfirst.com, so that's our organization and our tools and resources. But we also have a website called Your Way Together, and it's all on Indigenous cooperatives, and we have success stories and news stories and creating Indigenous co-ops in Canada.
And Christina, I'm on the planning committee for ACE, so I'll be sure and put a plug in for these women to talk about this. I feel it's really important. And we just want to thank everyone for being here today and being a part of this. Oh, that's nice to know. Nicole? We need to connect, Nicole. My email's in there somewhere. I can put it again, but I would like to keep in touch with you and with Nataka Creighton. And Mary, thank you. I'll do it again, just a second. I'm having a problem. I can't get out of this one thing, host and panelists or everyone.
Krista, could you just actually share with everybody the interviews that you did with the participants? You have links to them, right?
Go to yourwaytogether.com. And yeah, I did interviews with the participants, and so they're all hosted on there as well. So, and we also have a newsletter and a Facebook page. So find us. You can find Cooperatives First on social media, and our Facebook page is Your Way Together as well. So that we'd love to hear from everybody.
And I'd like to thank NCBA CLUSA for Elizabeth, especially for being the wizard behind the screen today and making sure everything ran smoothly. And I want to thank Mary Griffin, because she's been such a great partner in this work. And I really appreciate her. And you know, they've really facilitated everything with our group and helped us, you know, with logistics and everything, their whole team. So I want to say thank you again. And somebody's asking how to get in touch with you, Carrie Lynn. So if you put it in the everyone, I think she did up above, but we've had so many chats. And everyone will be receiving a copy of this. And thanks to the panelists. And Barry, we're sorry we didn't get to hear you. You kept freezing on us today.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I know that for some reason I'm on now, so
it's just how it goes with technology some days. But that's
well,
okay. We thank you for being here with us.
yeah. All
And
right.
Bonnie,
Well,
thank you.
yeah. Do you still have time to hear me, or is it too late?
I don't know. I don't know what time it is.
11:34, my time.
Okay, we're done.
Okay.
We're finished. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. Well, I
But
made
there's
the
still
effort.
47 people here. Do you want to go ahead and share? Go ahead and share.
Okay. Well, again, I apologize for my technology lack of connectivity, I guess. As I try to put my finger on the question, can you repeat the question again, Pamela?
About the impact and benefits to you for the work that you're doing in your community that you receive from being a part of this training.
Well, I'll say this, Pamela, that the training has been a godsend to me. Being new to cooperatives and being hired by the University of Nebraska to serve my community, I didn't know where to start. I do have a business background, and I thought, what the heck do I know about cooperatives? You know, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
And so to receive this training was just an eye opener for me, because it gave me the tools I needed to help educate and to create awareness about cooperatives to my community and tribal members. I think back about the abundance that training I received, the asset mapping. I mean, it was so relevant, and it just, again, I can't speak enough about how it equipped me with the tools I needed to move forward. And to this day, you know, having the opportunity to share that training, you know, tribal members are really reaching out, and I'm able to better connect with them from a traditional approach, because I have training in sales, negotiation, and I thought, well, I can use those skills, but I found that I'm far more effective now with this new model, this new approach. I heard the discussion on Sarah Silva, and I can tell you now that I'm very confident about facilitation after receiving her training. So this has just been a blessing to me. I'm grateful for it. And I know I shouldn't be talking about this, but I did I did receive a little raise from this training, so I've been blessed, you know. Was that okay, Pamela?
It's perfect. It's what's in your own heart that you get to share. And, you know, I've enjoyed knowing you and working with you. And I love, and your community, and you shared your community, and it's such a beautiful place. I just feel really fortunate to see all the good things that are happening in your community, Barry. And you're a connector. You know,
Barry's
people
like the
trust you.
essence of bake.
Yeah, he is, and so's Bonnie. It's that everybody that came to the training was like that. You know, they're all connectors in some way. They're like those feather clouds in the sky. And
Yeah.
just really, you know, really am blessed to know you. And I feel
Thank you.
like my life's been made, my life's a better place because of all the people that I've gotten to know through this work.
Yeah. Pamela, you know, I'm gonna do this now. In closing, you know, these have grown tremendously.
Oh, stop. You can't do that on
So
a
I bless you
webinar.
guys with that.
Oh, you're just bad.
Be
I'm gonna
blessed,
have a
guys.
talking. I'm gonna have a talking to with your wife. You're showing off your guns all the time.
All right, all right, all right.
All right, everybody have
Thank
a beautiful day, and thank you for being here.
you,
Thank
betcha.
you
Thank
so
you.
much.